Futurism's First Battles by F.T. Marinetti. I have to tell you that we are far too excited by our futurist ideas to dress them up in diplomatic language and elegant attire. I shall therefore be inordinately assertive in this book, all the more because I truly detest suggestive hints and academic eloquence. Indeed, the fierce battle we are waging daily against everything and everybody in Italy has notably increased our habitual violence. Circumstances dictate that we use brutal measures. This dangerous course of action doesn't allow for any mawkish sentiments. We are strong enough to scornfully brush aside the smokescreens sent up by the skeptics of our time. We are not allowed to use arms, and this forces us to do what we can with stones and ignoble hammers, with brooms and umbrellas to smite and prostrate the vast throng of our enemies, the traditionalists. On October 11, 1908, having worked for 6 years at my international journal, Poesia, attempting to free Italian lyric genius from its traditional commercial shackles that threatened to kill it off, I suddenly sensed that articles, poems, and polemic were no longer enough. The approach had to be totally different. We had to go out into the streets, lay siege to the theaters, and introduce the fist into the struggle for art. My poet friends Paolo Buzzi, Corrado Gavani, Enrico Caviccioli, Armando Mazza, and Luciano Folgore helped me search for the right watchword. For a moment, I hesitated between the words dynamism and futurism. My Italian blood, however, surged the more strongly when my lips proclaimed aloud the freshly invented word, futurism. It was the new formula, art as action, and a guiding rule for mental health. It was a youthful, regenerative banner that was anti-traditional, optimistic, heroic, and dynamic. To be raised above the ruins of an obsessive concern with the past, a static state of mind, traditionalist, academic, pessimistic, pacifist, nostalgic, decorative, and aesthetic. On February 20th, 1909, I published the famous Futurist Manifesto in Le Figaro. It was the burning fuse of our great rebellion against the cult of the past, the tyranny of academies, and the base venality which are together crushing the life out of contemporary literature. Everyone knows about the storms of polemic and the violent rush of insulting remarks and enthusiastic applause which greeted that manifesto. I have to say, however, that very many of those who insulted us had no understanding whatsoever of the lyrical and somewhat prophetic violence of that great revolutionary proclamation. As luck would have it, the young intuited with their blood what they had not understood with their minds. It was, in fact, to the blood of the Italian race that we had appealed, and it answered us precisely with 22,000 enthusiastic followers gathered by us in 1 month. Almost all of these were young people between 20 and 30 years of age. And I can tell you here and now with legitimate pride that all the students of Italy were almost always with us. Our movement went on expanding by the day, winning over all literary and artistic communities in the world over. The futurist painters Boccioni, Cara, Russolo, Balla, and Severini united with the futurist poets. And not long after that, we had the joy of launching Balilla Pratella's Manifesto of Futurist Music, which was a fine cry of revolt against the conservatories, against the tyranny of publishers, and against the stupidly conventional, profit-driven organization of the melodrama in Italy. Our ever-growing influence soon showed itself in unexpected ways, even in the writings of our opponents. Indeed, the Italian newspapers devoted lengthy polemical articles to the wholly futurist conception of Gabriele D'Annunzio's latest novel, and he, in an explanatory interview, plagiarized our clearly stated scorn for women as being essential to the existence of the hero in our times. Gabriele D'Annunzio followed us at a distance, as a convinced traditionalist, without, of course, ever having the guts to turn his back on his countless following of erotomaniacs and stylish archaeologists. We, however, were anything but satisfied at providing one of the most revered writers in contemporary Italy with such a distinctive image. It wasn't sufficient to see ourselves being courageously defended by a great sculptor such as Vincenzo Gamito and by an esteemed novelist such as Luigi Capuana. who publicly regretted in the Italian press that because of their advancing years, they were not able to come and fight at our side with fists and heavy punches against the old degenerate Italy that was rotten and corrupt. And it was precisely with fists and heavy punches that we fought in the theaters of the great Italian cities. After the great Futurist victory in Trieste, won at the Rossetti Theatre, we were immediately in the limelight at the Teatro Lirico in Milan, before an audience of 4,000 people, which we did not spare from the most insolent and most cruel troops. I had a few great young poets about me. With me, in verse and in prose, they denounced the truly ignominious state in which our intellectual life was struggling, the opportunism and the mediocrity that presided over our foreign policy, and the urgent need to raise our national dignity at all costs, for without it neither art nor literature are possible. The Serata had been organized by us in honor of General Asinari de Bernezzo, and had been unjustly retired for making far too futurist a speech against Austria to his troops. Therefore, disregarding the gale of interruptions, I had an ode in praise of his most noble act recited in its entirety. That ode, which was full of insults against the cowardice of the government and the monarchy, raised a tremendous uproar. I then addressed myself to the public in the stalls, the conservatives, the priests, and the out-and-out pacifists, and then to those up in the gallery where the mass of workers from the labor exchange were roaring like the menacing waters of a sluice. All of a sudden, one of those men dared to cry out, "Down with this country!" And it was then that with the full power of my lungs, I let out my cry for long live war, the world's only cleanser. Down with Austria! This cry, repeated persistently, unleashed a battle throughout the whole building, which immediately divided into two camps. The theater personnel came up onto the stage, putting on their official cummerbunds. But we went on with our violent demonstration against the Triple Alliance, amid the frenetic cheering of the students. The police invaded the stage and I was arrested, but released not long after. That memorable Serata had powerful repercussions in the German and Austrian press. The Vienna papers had no hesitation in angrily demanding solemn reparations of the Italian government, which were not conceded. The third Futurist Serata, held in Turin, was a magnificent battle. On the stage of the largest theater in the city, 3 painters of tremendous talent appeared, together with me and some other poets. Boccioni, Russolo, and Cara commented on and loudly defended their manifesto of futurist painting, which was no less violent and revolutionary than that of the poets. At the reading of this manifesto, which was an open revolt against academic art, museums, the realm of professors, archaeologists, and second-hand and antique dealers, a hitherto unheard of rumpus broke out in the hall, where more than 3,000 people thronged, the great majority of them being artists. The students of the Albertine Academy cheered the futurists with great gusto, while other sections of the audience wanted to make them shut up. But it wasn't very long before the great hall became a veritable battlefield. Punches and beatings with sticks, countless brawls and scuffles in the stalls, and up in the gallery. Police intervention, arrests, women fainting amid the indescribable clamor and uproar of the mob. There then followed other tumultuous seret in Naples, Venice, and Padua. Everywhere they split the audience into 2 camps, the free and the slaves, the living and the dying, the builders of the future and the stuffers of corpses. Our words brutally unmasked souls, leaving no room for half measures. In every one of these theaters, within a short time, we saw courage increase, as well as the number of men who were truly young at heart, but also mummies bizarrely stirring into life, drawn by our words from the ancient tombs. One evening, when the battle raged more violently than ever, the traditionalists, having organized some resistance, we were pelted for more than an hour with every kind of missile. But as usual, we remained impassive, standing tall and smiling. When we performed at the Mercadante Theater in Naples, 160 policemen stood watching on stage. Behind us, not lifting a finger, because the chief of police had ordered them to let us be conveniently slaughtered by the conservative, priest-ridden audience. All of a sudden, among the parabolas of potatoes and rotten fruit, I managed to catch an orange that had been thrown at me. I peeled it as calm as could be and proceeded to eat it slowly, segment by segment. Then a miracle occurred. A strange good humor took hold of those dear Neapolitans, and gradually, as my bitterest enemies gave themselves up to applause, the fortunes of the evening turned in our favor. Naturally, I lost no time in thanking the bellowing herd, whose admiration was suddenly stopped in its tracks, by heaping further insulting truths upon them, with the result that they waited for us outside the theater entrance to cheer us and lead us in a triumphal procession all over the city. After each of these boisterous seret, we usually divided among us the task of proselytizing, and each one of us went off with his own particular abrasive polemical strengths, into the circles and clubs, and even into the streets. In fact, into every corner of the city. Every day we held several meetings, never letting up, never resting, for the task we have taken upon ourselves demands almost superhuman strength. Everywhere, in Milan and Padua and Ferrara, and in other provincial cities, our presence unleashed storms of enthusiasm and hatred. But what we refer to as the Futurist Revolution of Parma has remained especially memorable. The police had forbidden the Futurist serata that we had planned in a theater in Parma. 50 Futurist students, led by the young courageous Caprilli, Talamasi, Coppertini, Burco, and Giori, had been expelled from the university by their bigoted, terrified teachers. These flagrant injustices caused a great deal of upset. 10,000 people, split into two camps, for and against Futurism, rioted in the streets surrounding me and my friends, Futurist poets, painters, musicians, and students. The soldiers, infantrymen, and fusiliers tried in vain to quell this incipient revolution, and while this was happening, I had absolutely no desire to get up and speak. However, a few days after, I had the following text distributed throughout the whole of Parma. Futurist letter to the citizens of Parma. If I did not respond immediately to your demand of speech, Marinetti's speech, made by countless voices, it was because we Futurists are not in the habit of taking or obeying orders from anyone. And what's more, as you were laying siege to the Marchesi Cafe, showering us with applause and curses, we were quietly sipping our cups of tea, thinking that we wouldn't be able to be heard with all that din. There were more than 10,000 of you, all dressed up in your holiday best, yet so beautifully ruffled by the electricity of Futurism, so intoxicated by the light of spring in your own city, which a few hours earlier had emerged reborn out of a relentless downpour of rain. We couldn't forget that above all else we were artists, thirsty for new sensations and for brilliant aesthetic disputes, unmindful already of the police ban that prevented us from proclaiming Futurism in a theater. We gave ourselves up to the pleasure of painting and singing in there, smoking the endless cigarettes of creative nights. All of one mind, Boccioni, Cara, Russolo, and I felt pleasure at having our unflinching backs crushed by this swarm of people, and dotted here and there, the red of the Carabinieri's uniforms, who were shaking their fists and seething with rage below balconies, sagging beneath hordes of people. Amid the tossing green foliage of a battalion of running fusiliers, and the bridling of the cavalry along the street which had no sidewalk, the vehement whistles of the police suddenly ripped the gaily colored silk of the sky, with so much force that a couple of shining Italian rainbows fell from it, onto the painting chests of two of their officers. If we hadn't been totally captivated by that sort of spectacle, and if my voice had been able to control your deafening whirlpool, foaming beneath a hail of flying fists, I would have shouted out that Futurism glorifies just that, violence and courage. It defends and exalts youth in art and in life, against the measureless armies of the dead, the dying, the opportunists, and the cowardly. I would have shouted that Futurism teaches everyday heroism, an intense love of life, disdain for the past and for the dead, progress in all its different forms, endless freedom, and Italian pride. Be wholly alive, be free of all nostalgia, despise anything that was, and leaving your ancestors behind, construct an even greater Italy of the future. Anybody among you who shouted "Down with Futurism" was unconsciously complying with that miserable brood of bigoted, terrified little professors who exclude from their university our bold young friends, Caprilli, Talamassi, Coppertini, Provinciali, Burco, and Jory, who are only guilty of Futurism, a sublime new offense. For the honor of Parma and of Italy, from the stage of the Reinhardt Theatre we shall soon be loudly condemning this abuse of power by those sad men who gnaw away at ancient scrolls and young skulls. That being the case, we shall doubtless have the joy of admiring, for a second time, your magnificent, explosive violence. This text translated here is taken from Guerra sulla igiene del mondo, 1915, but most of it had previously appeared in French as an introduction to Le Futurism, 1911, explaining to people outside Italy the militant rationale behind the Seurat, which more than anything else had brought notoriety to the Futurist movement in 1910 to 1911.